What's the danger to the republic moving forward with from a snap impeachment? An impeachment where there were no hearings before Congress voted. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, it's good to be with you, Andrew. I will tell you, this is the wrong way to go. Look, it makes a mockery of the Constitution. The bottom line is impeachment is very, very serious, not to be taken lightly. We know that the Democrats have taken it lightly for 4 years now. Mr. Green from Texas has been offering articles of impeachment for 3 years now. Russian collusion articles of impeachment that obviously had no validity to them. Now they decided on this snap impeachment, unbelievably, there was 1 hour of debate on the article of impeachment itself by those who might want to have defended the president from impeachment. 1 hour of debate for impeaching a president. That is just unbelievable.
And let's get to this, right? Which is to say, if it was such a crisis, Congressman Harris, then why is Nancy Pelosi dragging her heels in terms of getting it transmitted over to the Senate?
Oh, because Nancy doesn't want to interfere with, soon-to-be President Biden's first 100 days. I guess she didn't realize, or maybe she didn't figure when she did the snap impeachment, that when an article of impeachment is transmitted to the Senate, it must be the first order of business taken up. That's why Senate rules any member can object to it not being the first order of business. So that trial could have dragged on for God knows how long, and basically the president's new cabinet and appointees and all the rest couldn't be dealt with until the trial was over. So now they want to play real political games and delay it for 100 days, just so the president gets through his first 100 days, because it's so critical to impeach President Trump at this point in time.
But where do you go? And we're talking with Congressman Andy Harris from the 1st Congressional District. Where do you come down on this idea of the constitutionality of continuing the impeachment once a president leaves office? Where are you in this?
Well, look, I think that Mr. Dershowitz and Mr. Turley are correct. I think that there is it's not. I don't know if Mr. Turley's, but I know there are federal judges who have looked at it and said, look, you can't do it. The plain reading of the Constitution is you can impeach a president. It doesn't say you can impeach a president now or forever. I mean, look, I'll bring articles of impeachment against Barack Obama next week if we can impeach past presidents.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it certainly could have continued into the new Congress once Donald Trump took office, especially given things like the IRS scandal and a few of the other scandals that the Obama administration was taking. Let me ask you this, Congressman Harris. So we had the impeachment last year. You voted in that impeachment proceeding. You didn't vote this year. I think you might have been seeing patients that day, but was there a difference? Was it that this was a waste of time? What are your thoughts? What was the difference between the two, or was there a difference between the two?
Sure, absolutely. This was a sham snap impeachment. The other one was planned for weeks. We knew exactly when the vote was going to be. We had 4 hours of debate on each side for it. This time, as you may know, the week before inauguration is usually a recess week. I had scheduled literally months in advance to help take care of patients at Memorial Hospital in Easton that day. They're short of anesthesiologists. They're short of medical specialties. We have a huge backlog of surgeries from the lockdown, which maybe we'll get into. Now the international studies show lockdowns have no beneficial effect. But so many patients had their surgeries delayed. They're working through the backlog. They asked me to help. I went in that day to help. I was scheduled to do it. And I thought there was actually going to be real debate, and we wouldn't vote until late in the evening. Well, no, the Democrats bring out a bill that allows literally 1 hour of debate per side. And I was driving it to Washington to vote, when the vote was being taken, and never made it in time. But it's because they scheduled only 1 hour of debate per side. This is ridiculous.
So you were to be clear, you were going to go vote in this. You just literally you were in traffic on the way to D.C.
Absolutely. So the decision I had to make around noon, when it became clear that they were only going to allow 1 hour of debate, is do I just leave the operator? Just tell them, look, I'm sorry, I got to go, and some patient doesn't get their delayed surgery, or do I stay and take care of the patients and just say, look, this is a sham anyway. The bottom line is this impeachment is completely ridiculous. And honestly, my decision at that point in time was stay and take care of my patients. I can always put a memo in the congressional record, which we did, of how I would vote had I been there. and let it go at that.
I appreciate that. Listen, before we go to the news, let me ask you this. Isn't there something hypocritical in the criticism from colleagues like Jamie Raskin regarding election certification when those colleagues raised even more spurious objections back in 2017?
Hypocritical doesn't begin to discuss it. They actually contested 7 states electors in 2017. We contested 4 states on the House side. I think there might have been, because a lot of people left once the last vote was taken. They might have done 6, but the Democrats actually contested more states in 2017 than Republicans did in 2021.
So let's go here, and then after the news, I want to talk to you about policy moving forward. You've gotten some criticisms from Republicans here in Maryland regarding your concerns over the 2020 election, and also some other, lower level politicos. How do you respond to them, and do their criticisms have any impact on your political plans in 2022?
No, they don't have impact on my plans. The bottom line is the overwhelming majority of Republicans, especially in the 1st District, support me standing up for election integrity. There were serious constitutional issues, which I think those critics don't even bother to do the homework and investigate. But there were serious constitutional issues about state executive branches and judicial branches making election law in clear contradistinction of the Constitution, which gives the right to determine the, quote, manner of elections only to state legislatures. That was the issue that I was debating on the floor. And, if somebody disagrees with that, then show me in the Constitution where it says that a Secretary of State or a governor or a judge can make election law.
And to be clear, Congressman, you recognize that come Wednesday, Joe Biden is president. You're going to focus on what's going to happen with the Biden and Harris administration. You're not going to sort of disclaim this moving forward, are you?
No, look, obviously he's going to be inaugurated president, but I think we have to have – I think the Supreme Court has to make a decision on, again, the judicial branch and executive branch setting election law, even in a time of COVID. There are no COVID exclusions in the Constitution, as Justice Alito has suggested. We have to have a decision on that, and I hope this isn't all just swept under the rug by a inauguration. We have to determine, what went on. We have to determine the validity of voting by machines, where again software can be manipulated. I mean, look, we addressed this in Maryland several years ago because we have the paper ballot. We have a paper ballot that can be counted by hand if necessary, and a lot of states don't have that.
Congressman, listen, one of the things I always love talking to you about public policy. It's one of the things that. Let me tell a little story, guys. Back in 2010, Congressman Harris knows this because there was a fairly bloody primary, and back in 2010, I had been supporting another candidate early on, and then I came to hear Andy Harris at a debate, and Andy Harris was saying the right things about public policy, someone who gets public policy and what's important about sort of economic policy and small business and entrepreneurship, the relationship between small businesses and working families. And so I was swayed, which is what you want to be. You want to have an open mind. And that's why I was glad to have him on this morning. So, Congressman Harris, let me ask you this. So, Vice President Biden is proposing almost $2 trillion in spending, possible student loan repayments in this economic recovery plan. What are your thoughts on what was announced on Thursday?
Well, look, it looked just like the, quote, HEROES Act of Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. That was, a $3.2 trillion giveaway. Obviously, this has elements in it, and you know quite well, the damage, for instance, that increasing the minimum wage nationally to $15 would have. At this point, look, state by state, I don't oppose any state going on its own and considering a increase in the minimum wage. I would personally vote against it to $15. But that's a state's right or a locality's right. It is not the federal government's role to almost double the minimum wage. It really has nothing to do with COVID because we have unemployment insurance benefits. This bill, by the way, increases the weekly supplement, federal supplement from $300 to $400, which means that any person who is earning the minimum wage, if they become unemployed, would actually earn more on unemployment than they would even with a $15 federal minimum wage. Wow. So this is just window dressing for pushing through at the minimum wage bill. And by the way, he said at least $15. He didn't say 15. He said at least $15.
Well, let's talk about this because you mentioned lockdowns before and talking about sort of COVID-19 policy. And this is something that I've been saying quite a bit. And we're talking to Congressman Andy Harris from Maryland's 1st Congressional District. If we just give people money, but we don't open up the economy, aren't we literally just trying to throw money at the problem? It goes nowhere. Don't we have to have some kind of economic reopening in order to make any of this worthwhile?
Sure, that's right. Look, that's why I don't support the $2,000 stimulus check, but I do support targeted payment because you're absolutely right. If you give someone that $2,000, they can't go to the closed restaurant, which is really the place that needs the business. And the most important thing is all your listeners should know is that last week a large international study looking at lockdowns concluded that lockdowns have no substantive effect. Yes, social distancing and other precautions might, but actually locking down businesses does not. I was going around the Eastern Shore this spring, heavily criticized by the governor and his staff and the Democrats for calling for reopening the economy because that's the only way. Look, let's have adequate unemployment insurance for those people who are unemployed. Let's have protection for those businesses where governments lock them down, and let's go ahead and tell people what precautions you need to take in social distancing. But then let's reopen the businesses.
Yeah, I think you have to sort of go. You have to do this. I mean, we have to be realistic about these things. Let's go here, Andy, because you're. I'm sorry, Congressman Harris. I don't want to be so familiar with you again.
That's quite all right.
But because the 1st District, it is the Eastern Shore. It's also the Western Shore. Obviously, you've got constituents that are dealing with the mess in Anne Arundel County. You got folks in Baltimore County. You got folks all over the place. I mean, talk about the restaurants. Talk about these decisions, the sort of the pastiche that's out there. The restaurants in Anne Arundel County get to do one thing. Restaurants in Baltimore City don't. This is a problem.
It absolutely is. And, after redistricting, I don't have Anne Arundel County anymore.
Oh, yes.
Who knows? Maybe with the next redistricting, I will again. But, and it's a perfect example of where there was just no scientific evidence. In fact, the scientific evidence is contrary. When Baltimore City and Anne Arundel County closed down indoor and outdoor dining, it made no sense whatsoever. We know from studies now, we actually have experience, and we know that restaurants are not where COVID is transmitted. We have a pretty good idea how it's transmitted. It's transmitted, again, when people have large indoor gatherings, they don't take precautions, things like that. That's the main source of transmission. It's not schools. And this is another point. I mean, we have to reopen our schools. It's ridiculous that schools are not open when we know that children are not the vectors and restaurants are not the vectors. We cannot cripple our economy and our children's education with what I call, false science.
Sure. And there's a whole other aspect to this, which is that we've got a new administration coming in. That administration is going to do all kinds of things to, not just in response to COVID-19, but they have an agenda that would exist even without COVID-19, an agenda that folks are going to want to raise objections to and be opposed to. Congressman Harris, how do folks engage in opposition in an era of COVID-19? I mean, we're not going to have big Tea Party rallies. We're not going to have, big strategy meetings to go about doing this. What are your thoughts on how folks push back on things like a national $15 minimum wage or a complete reshaping of our energy economy?
Well, I do think we will have large rallies. I think that, again, the science is that you're not going to catch this outdoors, with the wind blowing. And I think we are going to have outdoor rallies. The president's outdoor rallies in November, obviously they weren't super spreader events because you would have read about it on the front page of the New York Times and Washington Post every time it happened. The science is we can have rallies. I think we will have rallies. Gun control, a huge issue. I think that, and I don't know if you've talked about it, but the idea that the speaker has to have a member of Congress pass a metal detector to come on the floor, which means those of us who have concealed carry permits, we cannot defend ourselves because she thinks that members of Congress are actually dangerous. That's
Wow.
because there are liberals who believe that anyone with a gun is dangerous.
There you go.
In strict distinction to the Second Amendment.
Sure.
But there are liberals who think anyone with a gun, even a member of Congress on the floor of the House, is dangerous. This is the liberal mentality that threatens our Second Amendment rights, and I believe that's one of the first rights that an attempt will be made to abridge. And the violence that has occurred in American cities, the violence that occurred at the Capitol, these will all be used as excuses to disarm Americans.
Let me ask you this: you going to be up at the inauguration on Wednesday?
I'm not going to the inauguration Wednesday. We've been warned, for security purposes, but I really wasn't planning on going anyway. I think what we're going to see is that a lot of members of Congress are not going to go. They've essentially locked down Washington. There really is no, big inauguration ceremony anymore. So I will, I won't be there Wednesday.
Real quick, I got two more questions for you, Congressman Harris. First of all, Mike Miller's passing. You were a Maryland state senator. Your thoughts on the legacy of Mike Miller?
Well, look, I think Mike was a tempering influence for a long time. I think he was actually more moderate than the liberal caucus that he led, and for many years was able to temper the Maryland liberal Democrats. But I think that age is gone, and I think that we're going to see some of the most liberal policies coming out of that Democrat majority in Annapolis this year than we ever have. But, rest in peace, Mike Miller. It was historic. I'm not sure any Senate president will ever in the United States, beat his record.
It is amazing. I guess before I let you go, as I said earlier on, I remember both the 2008 campaign. I remember the 2010 campaign. I remember the 2012 primary. Thankfully, that didn't happen. You talked back in 2010 about self-term limiting, and I'm wondering, right? We're up on that. What are your thoughts? Are you going to stay in? Are you going to move on to other things?
Sure.
Not to put you on the spot now, but I'm going to put you on the spot now.
Yeah, no, look, obviously, the situation is very different from then. No one would have anticipated that we have the pushback from liberals and socialists that we had then. I view this as when I was in the military. You sign up for a certain amount of years, but at the end of that, you look at it and say, look, if the job's not done, I'm re-upping. So at this point in time, I'm re-upping. The bottom line is this fight is not over. We have very serious threats, and in the end, it's going to be up to the people in the first congressional district and the Republican primary voters to put me on the ballot in the general election to keep me in Washington. But at this point in time, I'm re-upping for this fight.
I appreciate that. Listen, Andy Harris, thank you so very much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. You have a great week, my friend, and Happy New Year to you.
Thank you. Same to you.